The final boarding call for Swissair Flight 88 to Zurich echoed through the terminal, but to me, it sounded like a death sentence. I sat frozen on the cold metal bench, the 200 crumpled dollars in my palm, the only proof that the last few minutes hadn't been a nightmare. They had really happened. Only an hour before, my heart had been fluttering with fragile hope. A 2-week vacation at a luxurious ski resort in Zermatt, Switzerland. That was the promise from Mark, my mother's new husband. He was the kind of man whose wealth dripped from every pore, from the Patek Philippe on his wrist to the easy way he named expensive wines. For my mother, Eleanor, he was a ticket out of our struggling years. As for me, I had deluded myself into thinking this trip could be a chance to mend the invisible fractures that had appeared between my mother and me since Mark and his 3 children entered our lives. Jessica, 16, with her perfect exterior and the way she always looked at me as if I were a stain on their expensive Persian rug. Ethan, 14, who was perpetually glued to his phone, his world existing only behind a glowing screen. And Sophie, the 12-year-old, who had seemed friendly at first, but had quickly learned the subtle art of disdain from her older siblings. I had tried, God knows I had tried, but in their sprawling mansion, I was always an outsider, a living reminder of the past my mother was so desperate to bury. The unease began to creep in when we reached the check-in counter. Mark produced a stack of dark blue passports. I counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. My heart skipped a beat. There were only 5. Maybe my passport is in Mom's bag. I reassured myself, but a cold feeling began to spread through my chest. When the airline agent handed back 5 boarding passes, and none bore the name Chloe Anderson, that cold feeling turned to ice. Mom, I called out softly, my voice cracking. Where's my pass? Everything seemed to stop. Mark turned away with an irritated clearing of his throat. Eleanor, handle this, he commanded dismissively before leading his own brood toward the security gate. My mother pulled me into a secluded corner, behind a closed currency exchange kiosk. Her face was a strange mixture of guilt and annoyance, as if I were the one causing this inconvenience. Chloe, listen to me, she began, her voice alarmingly steady. There's been a slight change of plans. You won't be coming with us. Change. I stammered, my head spinning. What plan? No one said anything to me. Mark feels this trip is important for the new family to really bond. He thinks it would be better without complications. Complications. The words swirled in my ears. I wasn't her daughter. I was a complication. But I am family. Tears began to blur everything. I'm your daughter. Don't make a scene, Chloe, she hissed, her eyes darting nervously toward her new family. She pulled out a wad of cash. Her fingers, adorned with a diamond ring the size of marble, were cold as they pressed the bills into my palm. Here's $200. Get a cab home. You're old enough to look after yourself for 2 weeks. I don't have a key, I whispered, the shock making me numb. Mrs. Peterson, next door has one. You'll be fine. She said it as if she were discussing the weather. This vacation is important, you understand? Sometimes we have to make sacrifices. Sacrifice? I thought of the times my mother had sacrificed her own dinner, so I could have a little more. The time she worked double shifts to buy me a new book. That was sacrifice. This wasn't sacrifice. This was an amputation. She was cutting me out of her new life as cleanly as possible. She placed a quick, cold kiss on my forehead, a final, chilling goodbye. Then she turned her back. The steady click of her heels on the marble floor was like a hammer driving nails into the coffin of my childhood. I stood there, unable to move, watching her retreating back. She joined Mark and his children. Jessica turned, and when our eyes met, a tiny, triumphant smirk played on her lips. That smile confirmed everything I had feared. I wasn't just unwelcome. I was an obstacle that had finally been removed. They disappeared through the security gate. My world shrank to this cold bench and the $200 in my hand. The airport sound became a chaotic, meaningless buzz. I was a solitary island in a sea of people, completely invisible. And for the first time in my life, I felt the true meaning of loneliness, a hollow, bone-deep cold. The knowledge that the one person in the world who was supposed to protect me at all costs was the one who had pushed me off the lifeboat. Time seemed to melt into a blurry puddle. I don't know how long I sat on that bench. It could have been minutes or an hour. The noise of O'Hare surrounded me, but in my mind there was only a dead silence. Finally, some invisible impulse forced me to my feet, my legs stiff and robotic, and I shuffled toward the departures board. My eyes scanned a list of destinations, Tokyo, London, Frankfurt, until they found the words I was looking for. Flight 88, Zurich. Beside it, in cruel, glowing green letters, departed. It was a full stop, an undeniable fact. The plane had taken off, carrying my mother, her new family, and whatever shred of hope I had been clinging to, soaring through the clouds, leaving me grounded and alone. A surge of anger, hot and sudden, rose from deep in my chest, replacing the initial numbness. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling as they flew across the screen. I called my mother. Voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. After the fifth call, I switched to texting, the fury pouring out of me in capital letters. Where are you? You can't do this to me. Please call me back. The messages showed as delivered, but there was no reply. Finally, in a moment of pure bitterness, I typed, enjoying the airport lounge? Hope abandoning your daughter was worth the first-class ticket. There was no answer. I hadn't really expected one. By now, she was probably settling into her seat, sipping champagne next to Mark, and feeling the relief of having shed the baggage of her old life, including me. The afternoon bled into evening. I moved from one bench to another, a teenage ghost haunting the international terminal. I watched other families, fathers carrying sleeping toddlers, mothers double-checking tickets, couples holding hands, embarking on an adventure together. Each happy scene was a knife twisting in my wound. As I was huddled in the food court, justifying my occupation of a table with a long empty soda cup, an airport security officer approached. He was a large man with a salt and pepper mustache and eyes that were both probing and concerned. Everything all right, miss? He asked. You've been here for a few hours. I'm waiting for my ride. I lied, my eyes fixed on the floor. They're stuck in traffic. He didn't look convinced, but he just nodded and moved on after advising me not to leave my bag unattended. A fresh wave of shame washed over me. How could I admit that my own mother had abandoned me? The words were stuck in my throat, held captive by humiliation and some misplaced shred of loyalty. As the shops began pulling down their security gates and the evening crowd thinned, the stark reality of my situation became impossible to ignore. $200 wouldn't last long, and even if I made it back to house, I would be alone for 2 weeks with no transportation and limited funds. I was trapped. Hunger finally won. I shuffled to the one diner that was still open, slid onto a counter stool, and ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a side of fries. The waitress, a woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read Maria, brought them over and paused, looking at my face. You okay, honey? She asked, her voice gentle. You look like you've been crying your eyes out. I tried to manage a smile that felt more like a grimace. I'm fine, just a long day. She didn't press, but a few minutes later, she returned with a chocolate milkshake I hadn't ordered. On the house, she said with a wink. Whatever's going on, a little sugar and chocolate never hurt. Her small act of kindness nearly broke me. I thanked her through a choked throat and ate slowly, scrolling through my phone's contacts, searching for anyone who could help. My list of options was depressingly short. Most of my friends from before the move had drifted away, and I hadn't made many new ones in Mark's neighborhood. I tried texting 2 of my mother's friends, women who had been a part of our lives before Mark. One didn't reply, and the other responded with a curt message saying she was out of town. It seemed that when my mother had moved on to her new life, her old support network had been just as thoroughly left behind. As I continued to scroll, one name caught my eye and made my heart stop. Dad. I hadn't spoken to him in over 3 years. Our last conversation had been a brief, awkward phone call on my 12th birthday. After that, he seemed to have vanished completely. My mother always implied that he wasn't interested in being a part of my life, that he had a new family that took precedence. Your father has moved on, she would say whenever I asked about him. Some men just aren't cut out for fatherhood. I stared at his contact info, my thumb hovering over the call button. What if he rejected me too? What if my mother had been telling the truth, and he wanted nothing to do with me? The thought of another abandonment felt unbearable. But then I looked around the emptying airport terminal, felt the cold and the fear seeping into my bones. What other choice did I have? Desperation won out over pride. With trembling fingers, I pressed a button and held my breath as the phone began to ring. It rang once, then twice. Each ring stretched into an eternity, echoing in my desperate silence. I was about to hang up, convinced this was a stupid idea, that I was just setting myself up for more rejection. But then, just before the fourth ring, a deep, gravelly voice answered on the other end. Hello. That voice. It was strangely familiar, and yet alien after all these years. It froze me, the words I had prepared in my head vanishing into thin air. Hello? Is anyone there? The man asked again, a note of impatience in his tone. Dad, I finally managed to say, my voice small and shaky, barely a whisper. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, and for a panicked second, I thought he was going to hang up, but then he spoke, and the name he used for me broke something inside me. Chloe, is that you, sweetheart? The warmth in his voice, something I hadn't heard in years, shattered the dam I had built around my emotions. Dad, I need help, I said, and then the whole story came tumbling out in a rush, a jumbled mess of words punctuated by sobs. The remarriage, the move, the airport, the $200. By the end, I was barely coherent. She left you at the airport? His voice had changed. The initial shock was replaced by an edge as hard and sharp as steel. Where are you now? Which airport? I told him, half expecting him to offer to call social services or maybe wire me some money for a hotel. Stay right where you are, he said decisively. I'm coming to get you myself. It'll take me about 3 hours to get there. Can you stay safe until then? You're coming here? I asked, the disbelief clear in my voice. You don't have to do that. Maybe you could just help me get home. Chloe, he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. I'm on my way. Find the customer service desk. For the airline your mother flew, tell them your situation. I'm going to call ahead to make sure they look after you until I arrive. After he hung up, I sat in the stall for a few more minutes, trying to process what had just happened. My father, the man I had been led to believe wanted nothing to do with me, was dropping everything to come rescue me. It seemed too good to be true, and a lifetime of disappointments had taught me to be wary of hope. Still, I did as he said. I approached the Swiss Air customer service desk with my heart pounding in my chest. To my surprise, the airline staff were immediately sympathetic. They escorted me to a private waiting area, brought me a sandwich and some juice, and assured me they would keep an eye on me until my father arrived. This happens more often than you'd think, unfortunately, the customer service manager told me quietly. Parents changing plans at the last minute, leaving their kids to fend for themselves. The 3-hour wait felt both endless and surreal. I drifted between hope, fear, and exhaustion. What if my dad didn't show up? What if he came, but was resentful about having to rescue me? What if this was all some elaborate setup for another rejection? My mind wandered to the few memories I had of him from before the divorce. Him teaching me to ride my bike in the park, his steady hand on the seat as I wobbled forward. Him reading bedtime stories, changing his voice for each character. One Christmas morning when he assembled a dollhouse for me, his face glowing at my delight. If he had ever loved me that much, why had he disappeared from my life? Why hadn't he ever fought to see me? The question swirled in my tired brain as the minutes ticked by. Just as I was starting to doze off in the uncomfortable airport chair, a voice came over the intercom. Paging passenger Chloe Anderson. Please come to the information desk. Paging Chloe Anderson. My heart leaped into my throat as I gathered my small carry-on and followed an airline employee who had come to escort me, instead of heading out to the main terminal. However, we went through a series of corridors and security checkpoints until we reached what appeared to be a private terminal. Your father arranged to meet you here, the employee explained as we approached glass doors that led out onto the tarmac. And that's when I saw it. A sleek private jet with its staircase lowered from the door. And walking down those stairs was a tall man in a business suit, his familiar frame making me catch my breath. My father looked different than I remembered. His dark hair was now shot with silver at the temples, and he carried himself with an air of confidence I didn't recall from my childhood. But his eyes, when they found me, were exactly as I remembered, kind and crinkled at the corners. For a moment, we both just stood there, looking at each other across the distance. Then he strode forward, closing the space between us in a matter of seconds. He stopped just short of embracing me, uncertainty written on his features. "Chloe," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I can't believe it's really you." I didn't know what to say or do. A part of me wanted to run into his arms like the little girl who used to greet him at the door. Another part, a wounded teenager who felt abandoned by both parents, held back. He seemed to sense my hesitation. "I am so sorry," he said softly, "for everything, for not being there, for not fighting harder to stay in your life." Something in his sincerity broke through my defenses. The tears I thought had run dry hours ago returned with a new force. "Mom said," she said, "you don't want to see me anymore." I choked out, "that you had moved on." His expression darkened. That was never true. Not for a single day. He tentatively opened his arms. And this time, I didn't hesitate, stepping into his embrace and letting out years of pent-up grief on his shoulder. We stood like that for several minutes, both of us overcome. When we finally pulled apart, he kept one arm around my shoulders as he guided me toward the waiting plane. "Let's get you out of here," he said gently. "We can talk properly once we're in the air." Stepping onto the private jet was like entering another world. The interior was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Plush leather seats, polished with tables, and soft lighting created an atmosphere of quiet luxury. A flight attendant greeted us warmly and offered me a selection of drinks and snacks. I was too overwhelmed to make a choice, so I just mumbled a request for a bottle of water. As we settled into seats facing each other, I couldn't help but stare at my father in awe. This man, who in my memory was a carpenter with callous hands and clothes that always smelled of sawdust, now radiated an aura of power and success. "Is this your plane?" I asked, my voice still shaky. He smiled, a flicker of embarrassment crossing his face. "Technically, it's the company's. I'm the CEO of Horizon Tech now." "CEO?" I repeated in disbelief. My mother had always portrayed him as struggling financially, barely able to make his child support payments. "It's been a successful few years," he said simply, then leaned forward, his expression turning serious. "Chloe, I need you to know something. I tried to contact you for years. Birthday cards, Christmas presents, phone calls, all of it. When your mother remarried and moved, I lost track of you completely. I hired private investigators, but they couldn't find your new address. I filed motions in court, but they were somehow lost or delayed." My mind reeled as the implications of what he was saying sank in. She kept you from me on purpose?" He nodded, the pain in his eyes palpable. "I sent child support and extra funds every month since the divorce. Money I'm guessing you never saw. I thought of the second-hand clothes, the nights we ate instant noodles for days in a row, my mother's constant complaints about money. We were always broke." I whispered. She said, "You barely paid anything." My father opened his briefcase, pulled out a folder, and handed it to me. Inside were copies of cash checks, court documents, and records of attempted contact, all neatly organized by date. The evidence of his efforts and my mother's deception was undeniable. The numbers on the checks made my head spin. They were enough for us to have lived comfortably, even affluently. "I'm not showing you this to hurt you," he said gently, "but you deserve to know the truth." As the plane took off, lifting me away from the airport where my mother had abandoned me, I felt strangely weightless, as if I were shedding years of misunderstanding and manipulation with every mile we climbed. My father explained that he now lived in Seattle, running the tech company he had co-founded. Not long after the divorce, his small startup had blossomed into a major player in the industry, bringing him a level of success he had never anticipated. "I still kept your room ready," he said, a hint of sheepishness in his voice. "All these years, just in case." The flight passed in a blur as we began the fragile process of getting to know each other again. There were awkward silences and emotional moments, but underneath it all was a current of genuine connection, both new and familiar. He asked about school, about my friends, about my hobbies. For the first time in years, I felt like someone was actually listening, actually interested in my answers. When we landed at a small private airfield in Seattle, a car was waiting to take us to his home. I pressed my face to the window as we drove through upscale neighborhoods before turning onto a private road that wound up a hillside. The house that came into view took my breath away. A modern marvel of glass and stone, it was perched on a cliff overlooking the vast ocean. Waves crashed on the rocks below, and the setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and orange. "Welcome home," my father said, watching my reaction with a mixture of pride and nervousness. "I hope you'll be comfortable here." A woman named Linda greeted us at the door. I tensed initially, wondering if she was my father's wife, but he quickly introduced her as his executive assistant, who had helped prepare for my arrival. "I've made up the blue bedroom for Chloe," she told my father. "Fresh towels in the ensuite, and I've stocked the kitchen. The security team have been updated to add her to the household list." My father thanked her, and she left with a warm smile in my direction. He then gave me a tour of the house, each room more beautiful than the last. But it was when we reached the room that was to be mine that I stopped in the doorway, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness in every detail. The room was painted a soft sky blue with massive windows overlooking the ocean. A luxurious queen-size bed dominated one wall, while a desk, bookshelves, and a cozy reading chair created a perfect study nook by the window. But it was the collection of items on the dresser that caught my eye. "Are those—" I moved closer, unable to finish the question. My father nodded, his expression gentle. "Birthday and Christmas presents. Every year since I lost contact. I couldn't send them, but I couldn't bear not to buy them. Arranged chronologically were age-appropriate gifts for every milestone I had missed, still in their original wrapping. Beside them was a photo album labeled simply Chloe, with trembling hands. I opened it to find a few pictures my father had managed to collect of me as I grew up. School photos my mother must have sent in the early years after the divorce. A newspaper clipping of me receiving an academic award in 6th grade. A blurry photo that looked like it had been taken from a distance of me leaving my old school. "You really did try to stay in my life," I whispered, the reality finally sinking in. "Every single day," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "And I'm not going anywhere now. If you'll let me be your dad again." That first night in my new home, we ate dinner together, delivered from a local restaurant. Neither of us was ready to face cooking. The conversation flowed more easily as exhaustion lowered my defenses and the food restored my energy. For the first time in years, I felt seen and heard, my thoughts and feelings given weight and consideration. When I was finally tucked into the impossibly soft bed in my new room, the emotional and physical exhaustion of the day took over. My last thought before I fell asleep was that maybe being abandoned at the airport wasn't the ending I had feared, but the beginning I had always needed. The next morning, I woke up momentarily disoriented. The unfamiliar softness of the bed and the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below confused me. Then the event of the previous day came rushing back, and I sat up, taking in my new surroundings in the clear morning light. After a shower in the ensuite bathroom, which had a rainfall showerhead and more toiletries than I had ever owned, I put on my clothes from yesterday and went downstairs. I found my father in the kitchen, attempting to make pancakes with limited success. "Good morning," he said, looking up with a smile that became sheepish as he gestured to the misshapen pancake in the pan. "I was attempting breakfast, but it seems my cooking skills haven't improved since you were little." A memory surfaced of Sunday mornings when he would try to make pancakes while my mom slept in. They were always oddly shaped, sometimes burnt, but he served them with such pride that I never complained. "I remember your pancakes," I said, hoisting myself onto a stool at the kitchen island. "You used to make smiley faces with chocolate chips." His face lit up. "You remember that? You were so young." "Some things stick," I replied, accepting the plate he offered. Despite their appearance, the pancakes were delicious. and the simple normalcy of sharing breakfast helped to ease the remaining awkwardness between us. An hour later, I found myself sitting across from a sharp, tailored woman in her 50s who introduced herself as Judith Bennett, a family law attorney. "What your mother did constitutes child abandonment," she explained, her tone professional but kind. "Leaving a minor without appropriate arrangements for care is illegal. In addition, there appears to be financial misconduct regarding the child support payments your father made." I shifted uncomfortably in my chair. "I don't want my mom to get in trouble." "You just want to be safe and secure," Judith finished for me. "I understand, but we need to establish legal protections for you, especially if you want to remain with your father." My father, who had been listening quietly, leaned forward. "Chloe, the choice is ultimately yours, but I want you to know that I am prepared to file for full custody if that's what you want." The idea was both terrifying and liberating. I can actually choose? "You're 15, Judith said. "The court gives significant weight to the wishes of a child your age, particularly in cases involving abandonment or neglect." After the lawyer left, my father took me to his home office, where he had meticulously documented every attempt to maintain contact with me. There were copies of court filings for visitation rights, records of unanswered calls to my mother, and even emails to my school that had apparently never reached me. "She threatened legal action if I tried to contact you directly," he explained, showing me a letter from my mother's lawyer dated 3 years prior. "She claimed I was harassing her and causing you emotional distress." Each revelation was another piece of a puzzle, completing a picture of deliberate alienation that made my heart ache. Why would she do that? Just to keep me from you? My father sighed. "I think it's more complicated than that. After the divorce, your mother struggled financially, which was partly my fault. I hadn't had my career success yet. I think when the company took off and my financial situation improved dramatically, it was easier for her to maintain the narrative that I didn't care than to explain why she had kept us apart. 2 days after my arrival, as I was starting to settle into a tentative routine with my father, my mother finally called. I stared at her name on the phone screen, a whirlwind of emotions leaving me temporarily paralyzed. "You don't have to answer that," my father said gently, noticing my distress. After 4 rings, the call went to voicemail. A minute later, a notification popped up indicating she had left a message. With trembling fingers, I hit play and put the phone on speaker. "Chloe, darling, there seems to have been a terrible misunderstanding." My mother's voice came through, artificially cheerful. "I thought you understood the plan was for you to stay home during our trip. Mark felt it would be good for you to have some independence. And I agreed. I didn't abandon you, sweetie. That's such a harsh word. Call me back so we can clear this up. The resort's Wi-Fi is a bit spotty, but I'll try to check for messages. Love you." The blatant gaslighting made my stomach clench. There had been no plan for me to stay home. There had been no discussion of independence. She had left me without a word of warning, and was now trying to manipulate me into doubting my own experience. "Classic," my father muttered, shaking his head. "She hasn't changed a bit." I chose not to call back. Instead, with the support of Judith Bennett and my father, I made the decision to stay in Seattle permanently. The lawyer began the process of filing for a change of custody, gathering the evidence of my mother's abandonment and financial misconduct. A new chapter, uncertain but hopeful, was truly beginning. With the immediate legal matters in motion, my father turned his attention to more practical concerns. "You need clothes, school supplies, any personal items you want," he said. "We can go shopping today if you feel up to it." The shopping trip was surreal. Accustomed to thrift stores and clearance racks, I was overwhelmed by my father's insistence that I could pick out anything I liked without looking at the price tag. By the end of the day, I had a new wardrobe, a laptop for school, and a phone with an unlimited data plan. A stark contrast to the restrictive plan my mother had grudgingly provided. A week after I arrived in Seattle, my father and Judith Bennett suggested it was time to retrieve my belongings from my mother's house. With her still in Switzerland for another week, we had a perfect window to legally enter the home, as I was still officially a resident, and collect my personal effects without a confrontation. "You don't have to go if it's too difficult," my father assured me. "I can handle it with a legal team." But I knew this was something I needed to do for myself, a necessary step in closing this chapter of my life. I want to go, I said firmly. There are things there that are important to me. The decision made, we began planning the trip with the precision of a military operation. Plane tickets were booked, legal documents were prepared, and a moving company was hired to transport my belongings. As the day approached, I found myself composing and recomposing a letter to leave for my mother, trying to find the words to express the depth of her betrayal and my decision to forge a new path. 3 days before my mother was scheduled to return from Switzerland, my father and I, along with Judith Bennett and her paralegal, arrived at the house I had once shared with my mother and Mark's family. Using my key, I opened the front door to find the house exactly as we left it, eerily silent and undisturbed. Walking into that space as a visitor was a disorienting experience. Familiar sights suddenly felt alien, as if I were seeing them through new eyes. I noticed for the first time how the photos on the walls were predominantly of Mark and his children, with my mother occasionally included. There were almost no images of me, and none at all of me with my mother. "Where's your room?" my father asked softly, his hand on my shoulder a reassuring presence. I led him upstairs to the smallest bedroom at the end of the hall, the one furthest from the master suite. Opening the door revealed my modest space, tidy but impersonal, lacking the indulgent touches evident in the step-siblings' rooms we had passed. "This was your room?" My father's voice held a note of disbelief as he took in the basic furniture and lack of decorative elements. "It's fine, Dad," I said automatically, a defensive response ingrained after years of being told I should be grateful for what I had. His expression softened. "No, sweetheart, it's not. You deserve better." With the help of the movers, we began the process of packing up my belongings. Clothes went into wardrobe boxes, books and school supplies into smaller cartons. I was selective about what I took, leaving behind anything that was a gift from my mother or Mark, taking only what was truly mine or held sentimental value. As I was clearing out my desk drawers, I found a memory box I had almost forgotten about, pushed to the back of the bottom drawer. Inside were photos from before the divorce, a few of the birthday cards my father had sent in the early years after the split, and a small, worn teddy bear he had given me for my 5th birthday. "You kept these," he said, his voice thick with emotion, as I showed him the keepsakes. I never really believed her when she said you didn't care. I admitted, not completely. In my closet, behind a row of shoes, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. A stack of envelopes bound with a rubber band, all addressed to me in my father's handwriting. With trembling hands, I opened the first one and found a 13th birthday card, containing a heartfelt message and a gift card that had never been used. One by one, I opened the envelopes, each one containing proof of my father's relentless efforts to stay in my life. Efforts my mother had deliberately hidden from me. Cards for every birthday and Christmas. A letter explaining his new address and phone number when he moved to Seattle. Photos of him at his company headquarters with a note saying he hoped I would visit one day. She had all of this from me. I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "All this time, I thought you had forgotten me." My father pulled me into a fierce hug. "Never, Chloe. Not for one day." While the movers continued their work, I wandered into my mother's home office, compelled by a need to understand why she would go to such lengths to keep me from my father. Judith had advised that personal documents pertaining to me were my legal property to take, so I began to search through the file cabinet. In a folder labeled Divorce, I found the financial records that confirmed what my father had said. Monthly support payments, far larger than my mother had claimed to receive, had been regularly deposited into an account I never knew existed. The most damning piece of evidence was a draft of a letter to her lawyer, dated around the time she met Mark, outlining a strategy to minimize the father's influence as she integrated into her new partner's life. I was referred to as a complication that needs to be managed carefully to ensure Mark's continued interest. By late afternoon, the packing was complete. As the movers loaded the last of the boxes onto the truck, I sat down at my now empty desk and wrote the letter I had been composing in my head for days. "Mother," I began, the formality of the word feeling too distant, the warmth of Mom impossibly out of reach. I poured out my feelings of betrayal, not just from the airport abandonment, but from the years of being made to feel like an inconvenience. I explained that I had found hidden letters in the financial records, that I knew the truth about her systematic campaign to keep my father away from me. I am choosing to live with Dad now, I wrote near the end, not for revenge, but because I deserve to be somewhere I am wanted and cherished. I hope one day you will understand the damage your choices have caused. Despite everything, I don't hate you, but I need to love myself enough to leave. I placed a letter on the bare mattress of what used to be my bed, the white paper stark against the plain blue ticking. As a final touch, I left my house key beside it, a symbolic surrender of my place in this home. Walking out of that house for the last time, I felt a complex mix of grief, relief, and resolve. My father was waiting by the car, his expression concerned. "Are you ready?" he asked. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. He seemed to understand, opening the car door for me without further questions. As we drove away, I didn't look back at the house. Instead, I looked forward toward the future I was now free to build. My mother returned from Switzerland 3 days later. Within hours, my phone exploded with notifications, a series of increasingly frantic messages. "Where are you? Why is your room empty? Call me immediately. Chloe, this isn't funny. Come home right now. I just spoke to your father's lawyer. How could you do this to me after everything I've done for you? Please come home, sweetie. We can work this out. I miss you." The messages swung between anger, manipulation, and feigned remorse in predictable pattern. I showed them to my father and Judith, who advised me not to respond until the legal proceedings were further along. A week after her return, my mother showed up unannounced at my father's house, having somehow obtained the address. The security system alerted us to her presence at the gate, her luxury SUV visible on the monitor as she repeatedly pressed the intercom button. "You don't have to see her," my father assured me. "We can have security send her away." But I knew this confrontation was inevitable and perhaps necessary. "I'll talk to her," I said, "but I want you and Judith there." The look on my mother's face when the front door opened was a study in conflicting emotions. Relief at finding me warring with indignation at the situation. She was dressed in an expensive summer dress and designer sunglasses pushed up into her perfectly highlighted hair. The picture of a wealthy suburbanite. "Chloe, thank God," she breathed, moving forward as if to embrace me. I took an instinctive step back, and her arms dropped to her sides. "What is going on? Why did you leave? Why are you with him?" The last word was uttered with such venom that I flinched. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside," my father suggested, his voice calm but firm. Once seated in the living room, with Judith present as both legal counsel and witness, my mother's composure began to crack. Her eyes darted around the stunning space, taking the obvious wealth and taste in every detail. "So this is what it's about," she said with a brittle laugh. "He lured you away with promises of luxury. I should have known." "That's not why I'm here," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm here because you abandoned me at the airport. I'm here because you lied to me about my father for years. I'm here because I found all the letters and cards you hid from me." Her face fell, then hardened. "You went through my private things. How dare you? They were addressed to me." I countered. "They were mine to read." "You're 15, she snapped. "Everything under my roof belongs to me, including your mail. I was protecting you from his inconsistency, his empty promises." My father, who had been watching silently, finally spoke. "There were no empty promises, Eleanor. Only your systematic efforts to erase me from our daughter's life." "You have no right to judge me," she shrieked. "You have no idea what it was like raising her alone while you were off becoming a millionaire." "I sent support payments every month," he replied evenly, "more than the court required. Money you apparently spent on yourself while telling Chloe you were struggling." My mother's face flushed. "That's a lie. I sacrificed everything for her, including abandoning her in an airport so you could go on vacation with your new family." Judith interjected, her professional tone making the accusation land with even more weight. For a moment, my mother seemed speechless. Then her eyes narrowed as she turned back to me. "I did not abandon you. I was giving you a chance at independence. If you had just gone home as you were told, none of this drama would have happened. The sheer audacity of her revisionist history made my chest tighten with anger. You left me alone in an international airport with $200 and no house key. You didn't tell me to go home until you were walking away. You didn't answer my calls or texts. How is that an opportunity? You're twisting what happened, she insisted, though her voice had lost some of its conviction. My father leaned forward. Eleanor, we have the security footage from the airport. We have the testimony of the airline employees. And we have the text messages you sent Chloe afterward trying to cover your tracks. The color drained from my mother's face. You're building a case against me. You want to take my daughter and put me in jail after everything we've been through. This isn't about punishment, Judith explained. This is about determining what is in Chloe's best interest going forward. She has expressed a clear desire to live with her father, and given the circumstances, the court is highly likely to honor that wish. My mother's composure broke completely, tears streaming down her face as she turned to me. Chloe, please. I made a mistake. I was wrong. But you can't leave me for him. We're a family. We stopped being a family when you decided Mark and his kids were more important to me, I said softly. Maybe even before that, when you started lying about Dad. It wasn't like that, she protested weakly. Then what was it like? I asked, help me understand why you would hide my father's letters, lie about the money, and then leave me behind for a vacation. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, clearly unable to formulate a justification that even she could believe. Finally, she whispered, Mark thought it would be better if you stayed home. He said the resort was really for adults and his children, who were used to that kind of lifestyle. I was afraid of losing him. The raw honesty of it was somehow more painful than her earlier manipulations. So you chose him over me. I chose financial security, she countered. Do you have any idea what it's like to be a single mother with no money? Mark gave us a better life. He gave you a better life. I corrected. I was just the baggage. Before she could respond, the front door opened and Mark himself strode in, his face a mask of controlled fury. Eleanor, this has gone far enough. Get in the car. My father was on his feet instantly. How did you get through the security gate? Mark ignored him, his focus on my mother. I told you not to come here. You're only making things worse. Our lawyer said no contact. My mother seemed to shrink under his glare, her brief moment of honesty dissolving as she reverted to the role of dutiful wife. I just wanted to see Chloe. And now you have, he said dismissively. Let's go. As my mother rose to follow him, I called out after her. Is this really what you want, Mom? Someone who treats you like a child and me like an inconvenience. She paused, the conflict evident on her face, but Mark took her elbow in a firm grip. In the car, Eleanor. Now. My last image of my mother that day was her retreating back as she walked away, just as she had at the airport. Only this time, I wasn't the one being left behind. Following the dramatic confrontation, my father's legal team immediately filed for a restraining order after Mark attempted to enter the property a second time. The court granted it the next day, and a temporary custody arrangement was put in place pending a full hearing. The hardest part was accepting that my mother had chosen her new life over me, not just once at the airport, but repeatedly over the years with every hidden letter and every lie about my father. The little girl who had once believed she was the center of her mother's world had to face the painful reality that she was, at best, an afterthought. The months following my mother's dramatic visit were challenging but transformative. Adjusting to life with my father involved creating new routines, establishing boundaries, and learning to trust that his presence in my life was permanent. I began seeing Dr. Eleanor Wilson, a therapist who specialized in adolescent trauma and parental abandonment. Our weekly sessions provided a safe space to process the complex emotions surrounding my mother's betrayal and the years of manipulation. What you're feeling is completely normal, Dr. Wilson assured me during one particularly difficult session. Anger, grief, relief, guilt, they can all coexist. Healing is not a straight line. With her guidance, I began to understand that my mother's actions were a reflection of her own brokenness rather than my worth. This realization didn't excuse what she had done, but it helped me to carry the burden with less self-blame. Whole people don't abandon their children. Dr. Wilson explained. Your mother's choices speak to her limitations, not yours. My father enrolled me in Westlake Academy, one of Seattle's top private schools, for my sophomore year. The transition was both exciting and terrifying. After years of being an outsider in Mark's house, I was wary of forming new relationships. But to my surprise, for the first time in years, I found real friends. Zoe and Aiden, twins who shared my love of literature, welcomed me into their circle with an ease that was almost suspicious at first. Haley, a talented artist who noticed my shy attempt at sketching, offered to teach me proper techniques during lunch. Slowly, I began to let down my guard, allowing these new friends to see the real me. You're different than when you first got here, Zoe commented one afternoon as we walked home from school. Less guarded. I guess I'm learning that not everyone has an ulterior motive, I replied, the insight surprising even myself. Building a relationship with my father was a delicate dance of rediscovery. We were simultaneously learning who we were now and reconciling the memories of who we used to be. Sometimes the past and present aligned perfectly, like we remember my childhood love of stargazing and installed a telescope on the rooftop deck. Other times, the intervening years created unexpected gaps, moments of disconnection that reminded us of all we had missed. I wish I had been there for your first day of middle school, he said one evening as we looked through the photos I had brought from my mother's house. Your science fair projects, your first crush. We can't get those years back, I told him, surprised at the role reversal, me comforting him. But we have now and the future. He squeezed my hand, his eyes suspiciously bright. When did you get so wise? Trauma has its perks. I joked, dark humor, a sign of my gradual healing. 6 months after I moved in with my father, the court granted him full legal custody. My mother, represented by an expensive lawyer Mark had hired, initially contested the decision, but eventually agreed to the arrangement after Judith presented the irrefutable evidence of abandonment and financial misconduct. The judge ordered my mother to repay the misappropriated child support funds and established a structured visitation schedule, which would only begin after I completed a certain number of joint therapy sessions with her. In my opinion, it was more consideration than she deserved. But my father gently reminded me that maintaining some kind of relationship with her might be important for my long-term mental health. You can be angry with her, even hate what she did, without completely severing the connection, he advised. But the choice is ultimately yours. I'll support whatever you decide. I agreed to the joint therapy, though the first few sessions were excruciating. My mother vacillated between tearful apologies and subtle attempts to justify her actions. Her narrative shifted from denying the abandonment to framing it as a misguided attempt to please Mark, as if that somehow made it less hurtful. I just wanted us to be secure, she would often repeat. So you secured a spot for me alone at the airport instead? I retorted during one particularly tense session. Over time, I established firm boundaries with my mother. I would not move back in with her, regardless of her promises or emotional appeals. I would not pretend the past hadn't happened. I would not allow her to rewrite our history, to soothe her guilt. These terms were non-negotiable, and gradually, she seemed to accept them. A new chapter was truly opening, not one without scars, but one built on a foundation of truth, support, and a capacity for healing. My father remained remarkably neutral throughout this process, never speaking ill of my mother despite all she had done. When I asked him about this restraint, his answer stayed with me forever. Hating her would only hurt you, he explained. You're half of her, whether we like it or not. Besides, she gave me you, and for that, I can forgive almost anything. The first holiday season with my father and his extended family, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins I barely remembered, was a revelation. The genuine warmth and inclusion I experienced stood in stark contrast to performative family dinners at Mark's house, where I always felt like an unwelcome guest. My paternal grandmother, a vibrant woman in her 70s, pulled me aside during Christmas dinner. You have your father's resilience, she told me, her eyes crinkling with affection, and his heart. But that spark, that fire when you talk about things that matter to you, that's all your own. 3 years later, high school graduation arrived. My father beamed with pride as I delivered the valedictorian address. My mother attended as well, sitting awkwardly a few rows behind my father and grandparents. Our relationship had evolved into something civil, if not close, built on careful honesty rather than the false harmony she craved. College took me to the East Coast, where I pursued a degree in psychology with a minor in family law. The distance from both parents allowed me to define myself beyond the dynamics of their divorce and the drama of my teenage years. I discovered passions and strengths I might never have realized in my life had continued on its previous course. In my junior year, I interned for a nonprofit organization that supported children of divorce, using my experiences to help others navigate similar challenges. This work ultimately led to my career path, developing programs for family courts to better consider the needs of children in custody proceedings. The journey toward forgiveness was a long and nonlinear one. There were days when the memory of my mother's casual shrug as she left me at the airport still had the power to take my breath away. Other days, I could acknowledge her for who she was, her flaws, and her limited capacity with compassion instead of bitterness. Forgiveness doesn't mean what happened was okay. My therapist had explained years before. It means you're choosing not to let it consume your future. On my 25th birthday, I wrote my mother a letter expressing this hard-won understanding. I've learned that people can only give what they have inside them to give. I wrote, your capacity for unconditional love was damaged long before I came along. Realizing that has freed me from expecting what you were never able to provide. Her response was surprisingly self-aware. You deserve better than I was able to be as a mother. She wrote back, I am sorry for that every day. When I got married at 28, my father walked me down the aisle with tears in his eyes. From the moment you called me from that airport, all I've wanted is to see you happy and whole, he whispered before placing my hand in my soon-to-be husband's. Look at you now. My mother attended the wedding with her new partner. Mark had long since disappeared after their inevitable divorce. She participated appropriately, but made no attempt to take credit for the woman I had become, a restraint that reflected her own growth over the years. As I built my own family, I carried the lessons from both my parents, a roadmap of what to emulate and what to avoid. From my father, I learned the patient perseverance of true love and the courage to start over after loss. From my mother, I learned the importance of self-reliance and the danger of prioritizing status over authentic connection. The airport abandonment, which had once defined me, gradually became just one chapter in a much longer story. A pivotal moment, to be sure, but not the conclusion. In an unexpected way, being left behind had propelled me forward, forcing me to discover strengths I might otherwise never have known. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if my mother had taken me to Switzerland that day. If she had chosen me over Mark's preferences, would I have remained trapped in a cycle of seeking her conditional approval? Would I have discovered my father's unwavering love? Would I have found my own voice and purpose? These questions have no answers. Life does not offer parallel versions to compare against the path we actually walk. All I know for sure is that family is not defined by biology or legal documents, but by the consistent choice to show up, to cherish, to prioritize one another. My father taught me that. My mother, in her absence, confirmed it. Years later, as I held my own firstborn daughter in my arms, looking into her big, trusting eyes, the memory of O'Hare came rushing back with a painful clarity. But this time, it wasn't an open wound. It was a lesson etched into my soul. I kissed her forehead, whispering a promise that she would never have to question her place in the world, that my love would be her constant shelter, not something conditional or subject to withdrawal. My relationship with my mother continued to evolve in its complexity. Forgiveness was not a one-time event, but an ongoing process. There were times I could sit with her over lunch, listen to stories about her new job or her weekend trip, and see a woman who was doing the best she could with the limited tools life had given her. Other times, a careless comment or a subtle attempt to rewrite the past would trigger the old pain, and I would have to gently but firmly reassert my boundaries. She never fully grasped the depth of the wound she had inflicted, but she had learned to respect my reality, even when it didn't align with the narrative she wanted to tell. My father remained my rock, a constant presence of love and support. He was a doting grandfather who spoiled his granddaughter with trips to the aquarium and bedtime stories told in all the different voices. watching him and my daughter together. I saw a circle being closed, a legacy of love being passed down, stronger than any legacy of hurt. One day, on a business trip to Chicago, I found myself with a few hours to spare before my flight. A sudden impulse took me to O'Hare. I walked the crowded concourses, not as a scared, abandoned teenager, but as a grown woman who had carved out her own path. I found it, Gate B12. It looked surprisingly ordinary. Just another bank of seats, another window looking out onto the tarmac. But to me, it was sacred ground, a monument to one life that had ended and another that had begun. I sat down in one of the chairs, watching the passengers come and go, a family laughing, a couple having a minor squabble, a businessman typing on a laptop. Life, in all its messy, beautiful glory, was unfolding. I was no longer the girl who had been left at this gate. That betrayal had shaped me, but it did not define me. It had taught me about resilience, about the importance of truth, and about the human capacity for healing. It had led me to my father, to my career, to the family I had created for myself. If you have ever felt abandoned or betrayed by someone who was supposed to protect you, know that your worth is never determined by their failings. Their limitations are not your destiny. Family can be found and forged in the most unexpected places, if you remain open to connection even after heartbreak. When the boarding call for my flight was announced, I stood up and walked away, not looking back. The past was a part of me, but it was not where I lived. I had a future to build, a family to love, and a story of my own to continue writing. And as I stepped on the plane, ready to fly home, I knew with certainty that my journey hadn't begun with an abandonment. It had begun with a rescue. The rescue that I, with the help of a steadfast love, had finally learned to give myself. The story was not about how my mother left me at the airport. It was about how I found my way home, not to a house of brick and mortar, but to the one I had built inside myself, founded on truth, forgiveness, and a love that could never be left behind at any gate.